It was now the middle of August 2011. She'd just had her 12-week birthday and her second and final inoculation jab. Her age was clear for all to see, for as the weeks had passed, Felix's eyes had taken on their adult pigment, changing from their kitten blue to a beautiful shimmering green, just like her mother's. It's always a tough thing for any parent to recognise, but Gareth Hope, on a late turn, realised that Felix was now ready to meet the outside world. Up until this point, except in her trips to the vet, she had resided only in the office with the door always shut tight, preventing any escape. Felix knew that that was the way the world worked. People came in and out, but the door was always closed to her. That evening, as the summer twilight faded to dusk and the night set in, Gareth took a deep breath and lodged open the door. "Here you go," he said to his little friend. "You can have a look outside." Felix almost gave a double take. "Are you sure?" Before she ran out, tripping over her toes on this great adventure. She ran bravely straight to the public doors, which were just beyond the office door and always open. Then she stopped dead on the threshold to platform 1, as though surprised to find that there wasn't simply another office beyond, but instead a very big and very wide world. She almost skidded to a halt, as though her senses had been hit by a sledgehammer, and she could go no further until she'd digested all this newness. It was quite late, so the station was quiet, but that was quiet in comparison to rush hour, and in the dark, especially to Felix's little ears. The night sounds of the station seemed amplified 100-fold. There were no trains on the platforms. Instead, the melodies she could hear, and which mesmerised her, came from the swish of the public rubbish bags moving in the wind on their frames, from the syncopated rhythm of a woman's high heels as she clicked her way along the concourse, from the constant buzz of electricity coming from the station lights or its signals, which were always switched on. Felix was very alert and seemed very on edge, but she wasn't alone. Gareth loitered just a few steps behind her, keeping an eye on his charge. She had grown so much, but she was still a kitten, and somehow looked suddenly smaller standing on the threshold of this brave new world. Reassured by his presence, Felix turned back to face platform 1. She sat down in the doorway, perhaps a little abruptly. She took a few moments to take it all in, her head moving from left to right as she assessed everything that lay before her. The concrete of platform 1 rolled gently to its edge. It was bordered by a shocking yellow line, and Felix felt no desire to see what was beyond its cliff-like edge, where the platform dropped away into nothingness. Beyond, across the blank emptiness, there was another platform, platform 4. And if she looked to her left, she could just see the outer reaches of platform 2, located at the very foot of her home on platform 1. Platform 2 eventually tapered in a slope to the ground, but Felix couldn't see that from the doorway. It might as well have been in Siberia. It seemed so far away to the little kitten. To her immediate right were the bike racks, and they struck her, even on that first scout outside, as a rather safe-looking haven. Perhaps she made a mental note for the future. As the station cat quietly surveyed the scene, the evening breeze stirred her fur for the very first time, ruffling all that ebony fluff so that each cat hair quivered and moved in the August air. She blinked those big green eyes of hers. She twitched her long white whiskers, sniffing all those brand new smells. She looked rather as though she was thinking, wow, Felix, meet the world, world, meet Felix. Though the kitten didn't know it yet, all this would be her kingdom. Chapter 9, Brave New World. Come in, Felix. Gareth Hope paused at the doorway of the office a day or so later. The kitten didn't need asking twice. She dived across the office, scampered up his long thin legs, and nestled herself on his shoulder like a pirate's parrot. "Today, Felix," he told her, "we're going to be doing some security checks." These were a regular part of every shift, important to make sure that the station was running smoothly and safely. They involved a circuit of the entire station, including investigation of various nooks and crannies, so it was a good way to introduce Felix to the wider parameters of her new home. She was still so small, she wouldn't be walking. Instead, Gareth would become her long-legged chariot, transporting her all the way. Since her first taste of the station's exterior on that summer night a few days ago, Gareth and some of the other team members had accompanied her outside again. She hadn't gone much further than the doorway and had only ever gone out late at night, between the hours of 12:30 and 5 o'clock. Huddersfield Station locked its large panelled blue front doors and bolted them with a sturdy bronze pole. During the night, they were only opened again sporadically, 15 minutes before the departure time of the services that ran in the wee small hours, then closed immediately afterwards. When the doors were locked, only Felix and the 2 team members on duty were around. So it was a perfect time to introduce the kitten to a trainless, customerless Platform 1. She was too timid to explore very far, but she did like to go behind the bike racks. The metal docking stations towered above her like an iron forest, and she seemed to feel secure behind those thick steel branches with the yellow brick wall of the office just a pace or two to her back. That evening, Gareth was taking her out a little earlier than she was used to, before the sun had set. It had been a glorious summer's day, and the heat was still shimmering around the station as Felix and Gareth set off along Platform 1. Felix's enormous green eyes darted this way and that. There was so much for the little kitten to see. More customers were about for a start, and her ears pricked up at the rumble of a wheelie case along the concourse or the sound of a man's deep laugh. She was very used to people by now, so these noises didn't trouble her. Nor did the humans who kept doing double takes at the duo as Felix and Gareth passed them. Felix bobbed along happily on Gareth's shoulder, noting the coffee bar on Platform 1 and the doors to their right that led through to the main entrance of the station, and beyond that to St George's Square and Huddersfield's town centre. She started a little as a strange moving glass box rose into view like a whale from the deep. It was a lift, which connected the platforms to the subway below. Felix looked back over her shoulder at it, perplexed, but she and Gareth weren't going that way. Instead, the young announcer trotted down the stairs to the subway. He kept a light hand on Felix as they journeyed underneath the tracks. Huddersfield was a very old Grade 1 listed station. The foundation stone had been laid on the 9th of October 1846, when there was a public holiday and the church bells rang all day in celebration. And it was a little known fact that when it was first built, a vast labyrinth of rooms and passageways was also constructed on the subway level, which today is shut off to the public. In the 19th century, they were used as offices, coal rooms, lamp rooms, and even the first-class lounge. But they'd long since fallen into disuse, and now they lay in darkness, their old-fashioned fireplaces no longer flickering with flames, everything abandoned, covered in dirt and dust. Though TPE used a few of the rooms for storage or technical operations, the rest of the crypt was a spooky subterranean lair, more fitting for ghost stories and travellers' tales. Gareth definitely didn't want Felix to go exploring down there. It was a place that gave the shivers to several team members, and he didn't want Felix to get lost. They stuck to the well-lit public access subway instead, a clean and bright tunnel, modern and manageable. Up they popped on Platform 4, Felix whisked her head about as they came up the stairs, taking in all the new sights and sounds. Between platform 4 and 8 was a buffet room, but it was closed at that early evening hour. It did a roaring trade in the mornings when the smell of frying bacon and the clatter of plates tempted in bleary-eyed commuters. Peering towards the south end of the station as they came up from the subway, Felix glimpsed platforms 5 and 6, which were tucked between platforms 4 and 8, using a different bit of track. It was just as well she wasn't numerically minded, as the station's layout would have foxed a mathematical genius. But for those keeping tabs, Huddersfield has no platform 3 or 7. But Felix wasn't interested in the platforms or the people. Instead, her eyes narrowed sharply as she looked up at the station's roof. Huddersfield Station is only partly covered by its corrugated iron roof. There is a gap in it, running parallel to where the train tracks divide platform 1 and 4. But the open sky wasn't what had caught the little kitten's eye. It was the crows. They lived on the station, a number of big black beasts who claimed the place as their own. The roof was supported by a crosshatch of several steel girders, providing the birds with plenty of prime perches. They were cocky, confident creatures with slick, oil-like feathers, and at that time were larger than Felix herself. As she watched them swoop down to the platforms to pick over the crumbs the customers had left behind, she gave a worried frown as though to say she wasn't sure she liked those birds. As Gareth continued his security circuit by walking along platform 4, however, something else happened which drove all thoughts of the crows from Felix's mind. There was a silent, still train sitting at the platform as they walked along it, a local stop-in service which had been slumbering there quietly before its journey began. The pair were just passing the train when its engine suddenly came to life and revved up with the most enormous roar. Felix was still on Gareth's shoulder. When she heard that booming, jarring sound, her claws came out in fright, and she dug in as hard as she could, trying to get as close to her friend as possible in order to feel secure. Gareth yelled in pain, and he got the sense that if Felix could have done so, she would have yelled out loud too. As it was, she dug in even harder, until Gareth reached round and gingerly lifted her off. He cradled her in his hands, and seeing that she was scared, rushed her back to the safety of the announcer's office. He ended up with claw marks all over his shoulder, but Felix was okay. Although it was clear that Felix was none too sure about the thunderous engines, the team at Huddersfield knew from the success stories of those happy railway cats living up and down the country that they simply needed to persevere in getting her used to the trains, and Felix would be fine. She was simply like a child who puts her hands over her ears at the roar of a jet engine on an aeroplane. In time, that sound would become nothing to fear, just a part of everyday life. Felix was a station cat. She would get used to the noisy engines. Her colleagues had read about how important it was to expose kittens at a very early stage to the things they expected them to consider normal and safe when they were adults. Anything they don't experience at that young age might be viewed with fear and caution later on in life, to the detriment of the cat. It was why the team had wanted to give a kitten a home in the first place, so that she could learn the ropes as she was learning life itself. The team took Felix's initiation into station life slowly, though, and were always understanding. The kitten was never rushed into anything, and if she didn't want to go outside, she was not forced to. Yet she rarely ever wanted to stay in. The call of the wild and adventures awaiting her were sirens to the station cat. As the team helped her to adjust, they made sure that someone was always with Felix when she stepped outside, and she never left the office if the concourse was busy. Her colleagues used to carry her around in a ball in their hands until she got used to the trains and became more confident. Gareth and the others would regularly take her round the station on their security checks. And over the next few weeks, she slowly became inured to the engine noises of the stationary trains rumbling quietly in the station. She was nonchalant too, about the chimes of the opening and closing doors, the sounds of the station announcements over the crackling tannoy, and the hiss of the little puffs of air that the trains let off as they prepared to depart. She often wanted to stay close to Gareth when they did the rounds, but she didn't freak out anymore, and to Gareth's and his shoulder's relief, her claws were not as prominent. Felix usually sat on his shoulder as they made their way around the station, and for Gareth it became second nature to have a cat perched there. It must have been quite a sight, and this fluffy new member of the station crew certainly seemed to cause a stir among the commuters, who would do a double take as they walked past. Not everyone seemed to approve, however. One afternoon, Gareth noticed a couple of the regular train spotters huddled in their usual spot at the end of the platform, shaking their heads disapprovingly as though saying in despair, "What's happening to this railway?" With Felix now going out and about, the team made sure she had the perfect accoutrement, her very first collar. It was Angie Hunt who had the pleasure of buying it for her, and it was a complete pleasure. She had an absolute field day. She got it from a nearby pet shop and spent a long time looking for exactly the right one. Angie loved sparkly things, so it was perhaps no surprise that the one she chose was dotted all over with glitzy diamante studs. It was cornflower blue, the colour of the tops of the dip-dyed TPE trains, and Felix looked an absolute stunner in it. So glamorous. But while Angie was delighted with her selection, it didn't meet with universal acclaim. "What is that?" said Billy in abhorrence the first time he laid eyes on it. He thought it was an abomination. He looked Felix up and down and then turned to Angie. "Why? But why would you choose something like that?" "Because she needs something so that you can see her," Angie retorted. "You could certainly do that." The diamante studs dazzled like glitter balls at her throat, catching the September sunlight. Of course, a collar isn't much good without a tag. It was Christine in the booking office who gave Felix her first one. By this time, everybody at the station was giving the kitten bits and pieces, toys, treats, new bowls, and all sorts, and the collar tag was Christine's own special gift for the cat who had transformed the entire station. She went to the pet shop and got Felix's name and address, Platform 1, engraved on the front of the tag, and the team leader's work mobile number engraved on the back, so that if the kitten ever got lost, people would know that she was loved and wanted and missed, and she'd be able to find her way home again. It wasn't any old tag that Christine bought. Oh no, this was a tag for Felix, the Huddersfield station cat. It needed to be something special. Christine had seen the jazzy collar Angie had given her, and as she shopped, she was also musing on the poor kitten's gender-confused start in life. So Christine picked out a beautiful, hot pink, heart-shaped tag for the station's little girl. One can imagine Billy's reaction. Angie had been one of those trying to help her little kitten adjust to the station's noisy exterior. While they all loved carrying Felix about the place, that wasn't a long-term solution. The kitten needed to stand on her own four paws. But there were so many things that could go wrong if she was let loose immediately. She could run off. Someone could take her. The volume of strangers coming through the station each day was frightening when Angie really thought about it. Not to mention the danger of the train tracks if Felix was released before she understood the threat they posed. She was coming up to 4 months old, so it was still a lot for her to comprehend. But Angie thought she had a solution. A cat harness. "We can get her a little lead," she exclaimed, pleased with the idea. Then we can walk her around, and she'd get to know the platforms on her own four paws, but she'd be safe as houses. Felix was soon the proud owner of a bright pink fabric cat harness. It slipped over her fluffy back and fastened around her belly and her neck, and was attached to a long lead so that the team leaders could walk her around. Billy took one look at it and threw his hands up in despair. "I am not walking round with a cat on a lead," he explained. "Walking round the station with a cat on the flipping lead? There's no way." Chapter 10, Doctor's Orders. Despite Billy's reluctance, the rest of the team at Huddersfield were happy to accompany Felix on a few laps of the station. Before long, she was able to be taken off the lead altogether and could be let loose. Part of the reason the staff were so confident about doing that, however, was because they themselves were like mother hens or bodyguards, which was perhaps a more befitting description given the glamourpuss look Felix was rocking these days. Gareth would often accompany her outside, and if she went anywhere near the edge of platform 1, he would cautiously shepherd her away from the yellow line, making sure she stayed safe. Felix, in truth, showed no signs of wanting to peer over the edge of the abyss. She kept well back, just as her colleagues showed her, and never really ventured of her own accord away from the area adjacent to the office. She never even went down the steps to the subway. In fact, she spent most of her time outside by the bike racks. They were perfectly located as far as Felix was concerned. For if she was spooked by anything, she could run straight back to the office, quick, sharp. If she heard a train coming, she would run for home at once, for its deafening roar and soon-to-be squealing brakes still seemed to inspire her with the fear that the sounds from stationary trains had long since ceased to do. Often she would flee to the Lost Property Office, which was located right beside the office door, and kindly Angela Dunn would pick her up and give her a cuddle until the train had gone and Felix felt brave enough to explore those bike racks once more. She was very happy sitting there and watching life go by, and it seemed to Felix she had the best of both worlds, fun times playing and snoozing in the office, and the odd promenade with the oh-so-attentive escort. But for all the mothering the station team gave her, the time was approaching when Felix herself was going to be relieved of such responsibilities. In the middle of September, she passed the milestone of her 4-month birthday, and an appointment was made to have her spayed and microchipped. Felix had to go back to the vet. "How are you doing, Felix?" Gareth Hope asked his little friend. Felix raised her green eyes grumpily to meet his and almost scowled. Then she moved her head just a little, and he suddenly vanished from her viewpoint, which was very narrow these days, as she had the most annoying post-surgery cone around her neck. Felix hated it. She lifted a white cat paw to her black shoulder and once more knocked at it, trying to get it off. More often than not, she succeeded. The white comb was supposed to be attached to her diamante collar, but Felix was clever enough to have worked out how to slide her collar over her head with one paw, so she soon made easy work of giving the comb a slip. She was still tiny too, so even though the comb was kitten size, it still looked too big. It was an absolute nightmare trying to keep it on her and make sure she didn't pick at her stitches. "Leave her be, lad," said Billy, who was also in the office. "She just needs a bit of peace and quiet, don't you, lass?" The grand-looking cat Billy had once so admired looked very sorry for herself indeed. The stitches from the operation were still fresh, and she had a big shaven patch on her side where the vet had clipped off lots of her lovely fur. As she was so long-haired, even when it started regrowing, it took an awfully long time, 2 or 3 months before her coat was back to normal. Felix looked most put out that her glamourpuss days seemed behind her. "How are you doing anyway, young Gareth?" Billy asked his colleague meaningfully. Gareth, the university dropout, who was only working at the station as a stopgap job while he figured out what he really wanted to do, was by now 24 and had been there for almost 5 years. But it was so easy to stay. It was family, wasn't it? And how could Gareth turn his back on that, especially now Felix had joined them? The station felt like home. Gareth didn't reply, but he felt Billy's wise eyes fixed on him as he fiddled self-consciously with some paperwork on his desk. Billy had become almost a father figure to Gareth as they'd watched together over the years. Billy had seen it all on the railway. He knew how people started and then stayed. Blink, and suddenly 30 years had passed and you were still on the same job, making the same jokes with the same people, but you were now wizened and grey. He cleared his throat and repeated something he'd said to Gareth a few times already when it was just the two of them in the office and they had some time alone. Be aware, young Gareth, he warned him in his gruff voice. You're getting stuck here, son. He slipped outside with a cigarillo between his fingers and let the door slam shut behind him. Gareth sighed, Billy's words of warning rattling around in his head. The old-timer had told him, you've got to move on. If you don't move every 3 or 4 years, people will think you've given up and they'll never entertain giving you another job. Was he right? Gareth didn't know. Like Billy, during his 5 years at the station, he had seen plenty of colleagues become set in their ways, but funnily enough, for all his years of service, Billy wasn't one of them. Though some long service employees could become very black and white in their view of things, Billy could not only see shades of grey, but also in technicolor, sometimes literally. He liked to open things up and try out new ideas, and one of his recent innovations was to transform part of the station concourse into an art gallery, a vision that would come to fruition the following spring. He was a pioneer when it came to the environment too, and had already won an award for his novel ways of making the station run more greenly. Billy's philosophy was that the station didn't just have to be a terminus. It could be a hub of the community and the team could make it really nice. Nor was he the only one at Huddersfield with those ideas. Andy Crugen had started a library where people could leave and take books for free. Later, the concourse would display local poetry and get involved in creative writing projects. It was part of what made Huddersfield so special and why Gareth loved working there so much. It wasn't a big impersonal station as some of the major hubs could be, but neither was it a quiet little place off the beaten track where people had given up. No, Huddersfield was a place where people made things happen. And he was among those people, Gareth realised suddenly. He glanced down at Felix, who glowered at him from within her big white cone. He had made the station cat happen. It had given him a little bit of faith in himself. Maybe Billy is right, he thought. Maybe I should keep an eye out, see if anything comes up. In the meantime, he had a poorly kitten to care for, and he wasn't the only one on duty. Everyone passing through the office had a kind word and more for Felix on her sickbed. Poor thing. She really was distressed. She took to wandering the office with her favourite brown bear clutched in her mouth, just walking up and down, mewing. What's up with you? Do you want to go out? Angie Hunt would ask her, as Felix cried plaintively. But the cat would just pick up the bear and go back to her slow, sad meandering. Both Angie and Angela thought she treated it like her baby. Perhaps, they mused, it was Felix's way of mothering, now that she herself would never have her own kittens.